What's up guys, back with another Fallout video, and today I wanted to go over and give you guys some of my opinions on the recently released Fallout 4 VR for the HTC Vive virtual reality headset. Now, just like Doom VFR and Skyrim VR, I'm sure there are a number of you that are probably curious about this particular version of Fallout 4, and I figured that I could go ahead and give you guys my 2 cents on whether this version is worth it or not. Now before we start, I should mention that I didn't receive this title for free and did end up purchasing it. Now, if you're curious, you can receive Fallout 4 VR for free by purchasing an HTC Vive as a part of a free promotion that extends from October 2nd through December 31st of 2017. So if you buy a Vive within the next couple of weeks, you should get a copy of Fallout 4 VR. I also want to mention that I will be fairly critical of Fallout 4 VR in this video, and I have to admit that some of that is my own bias, as I thought that Fallout 4 VR was going to be something that it ultimately wasn't. However, with that said, I will also mention many of the game's more positive aspects as well, because I do think there is a lot to like with Fallout 4 VR. But with all of that disclosure out of the way, I'll go ahead and give you guys some of my opinions based on my 6 hours of experience so far. Now, if I had to sum up Fallout 4 VR in one sentence, it would simply be that Fallout 4 VR is a flawed port of what is otherwise a pretty good game. Now, if that statement worries you, what I will say is that there's a pretty good chance that if you already like Fallout 4, you're probably going to like Fallout 4 VR. And I do think there are a lot of things that the developers did right. For one, the game's control layout for the Vive wands is actually pretty good. Now, while certain things like operating the menus is somewhat awkward at first, it becomes much more intuitive as you play. And if you're curious, Bethesda has also included a lot of options for controls and certain VR display preferences in the game's settings menu. For example, you can select direct movement, which allows the player to change the locomotion from teleporting to free movement. There's also a left-handed mode if you need that, and you can also choose whether the Pip-Boy displays on your wrist or whether it just projects in front of you. And this ability to tweak a lot of VR settings is important, and I'm pretty glad that Bethesda took the time to include this. As of the making of this video, which is about a day or two after launch, you may be surprised to know that existing Fallout 4 DLC seems to be compatible with Fallout 4 VR. Now, while it's definitely buggy and I've experienced some visual glitches myself, I have been able to visit Nuka World in Fallout 4 VR. Now, it is important to stress that Fallout 4 VR doesn't launch with any of the DLC, but if you copy the DLC files from regular Fallout 4 over, you can launch some of the DLC. Along with that, there are also reports of people that have gotten regular Fallout 4 mods to work in Fallout 4 VR as well. And having this compatibility, in my personal opinion, is awesome. And I think we can rest assured that mods and DLC compatibility between both versions will definitely be improved as Bethesda patches the game. And while I guess this should really go without saying, being able to experience Fallout 4 in VR is pretty awesome. Like Doom VFR and Skyrim VR, the depth perception offered by wearing a VR headset greatly improves what was otherwise a pretty good game to begin with and makes the experience far more immersive. Now, before I start to rant, I just want to reiterate that there is a lot to like with Fallout 4 VR. I like how Bethesda implemented VATS with this version, and I also like how settlement building works with the Vive wands. With that said, we should probably talk about the myriad of weird design choices and technical issues that Fallout 4 VR has. Alright, so while this first design choice can be fixed with mods, teleport locomotion in Fallout 4 VR is pretty jank. Like Skyrim VR on PS4, further teleports consume action points. However, this is arguably worse than Skyrim VR because there's a good chance that you could be teleporting along, you end up depleting your action points without realizing it, and all of a sudden, you can't use VATS. Of course, an ideal or easy fix for this situation would be to simply download a mod that makes teleportation not consume any action points. And I guess in the developer's defense, They don't want you warping across the map in a matter of seconds, but I do think there needs to be some solution for teleport other than having it consume stamina or action points, because I feel like that implementation is just bizarre. With this said, Bethesda did add that free locomotion mode, which works fairly well, and the only other time you would encounter teleport is during settlement building. So I guess depending on your playstyle, it may or may not be much of an issue. Now, this next thing is more of an issue, but the gun models in Fallout 4 VR leave something to be desired. Not only are the gun models really big, but a number of them seem to be off-center. Now, you can easily see this when you hold the weapon up to look at the side, and then you holster it. There is a noticeable difference in where the gun model's trigger is placed and where the Vive's trigger is, and this can potentially throw off your aim. Again, maybe this can be fixed with mods as well, but I'd like the gun model's placement to conform a little more to where the triggers actually are on the Vive wands. Speaking of gun models, all scopes on weapons don't seem to work at all, and I guess this is because regular Fallout 4 transitions to a screen with a reticle, but it's baffling to me that this was ignored by Fallout 4 VR's developers. Perhaps there will be a patch or mods that eventually fix this, but I've got to say that non-working scopes is pretty disappointing because it makes aiming scoped weapons virtually impossible. On a different note, the implementation of VATS is pretty cool, and I really like the slow motion effect. And it's also cool that the game auto-targets for you based on which specific body part that you're aiming at. However, it does leave something to be desired, as it's difficult to stay tracked to one specific body part, because if you move your Vive wand slightly in one direction or the other, you can unintentionally be targeting a different body part than the one that you meant to target. Compared to Skyrim VR, I also really like the Vive tracking, and it's definitely leaps and bounds beyond the move controllers on the PS4, like we saw with Skyrim VR. The full 360-degree tracking along with room scale tracking is totally superior, and it makes combat much more enjoyable. However, compared to in-game tracking with other Vive games that I own, I do feel that Fallout 4 VR is noticeably less responsive. Now, admittedly, I'm not sure if this is on my end or if it's on Bethesda's end, but I think tracking fluidity could definitely be improved so that it's much more responsive. It's also worth mentioning that Fallout 4 VR has launched with a number of technical issues as well. Now, in Bethesda's defense, they have been pretty good about patching the game fairly consistently, and things will likely be even better a month or two from now. But this is something that's worth considering if you're purchasing a Vive or a copy of Fallout 4 VR sooner rather than later. Now, at this point in the video, you're probably wondering, is Fallout 4 VR worth it or not? Honestly, I do think there's actually really a lot to like here, and the game has massive potential provided some of the design and technical issues are either fixed by Bethesda themselves or by some enterprising modders. However, I can't really say that Fallout 4 VR is something that would make me want to rush out and buy an HTC Vive if I didn't already own one. This isn't to say that Fallout 4 VR itself is bad, and I would say if you were planning on buying a Vive headset to experience other games in addition to Fallout 4 VR, then Fallout 4 VR could be something that you might really enjoy, because as of right now, it really is one of the few VR games that you could potentially play for 100 hours or more. And to the developer's credit, the control implementation is pretty good, and I could foresee myself playing this a lot more in the future. I would even say that this would be a pretty good game to pick up when it gets a price drop. With that said, I think I'm hesitant to 100% recommend this game because of what it is. As I said earlier in this video, this is a port of Fallout 4 into VR. It's not necessarily a virtual reality version of Fallout 4. Now, if you don't mind that it's a port, then by all means go ahead and pick Fallout 4 VR up. However, if you were expecting Fallout 4 VR to be a true enhancement of the original game that would demonstrate what the HTC Vive is capable of, I think you're going to be disappointed like I was. So now that we've established Fallout 4 VR as a port that will gradually improve as time goes on, I do want to talk about why I think Fallout 4 VR should have aspired to be something much greater. This may show my bias a little bit here, but there are a lot of really good VR experiences out there, especially when it comes to VR shooters. And of the VR shooters that I've played, I kind of feel like Fallout 4 VR comes up short. Now, in the case of Fallout 4 VR, it's more of an RPG. You've got settlement crafting and all that stuff. But something simple like using both Vive wands to help steady the aim of a rifle is something that you can't even do in this game that you can do in a lot of other VR shooters. And imagine if you could physically eject and reload your weapons as opposed to just pressing the reload button and having the game do it for you. I guess what I'm getting at is features like these would help make Fallout 4 VR truly stand apart from the original version and would make the whole experience far more immersive. Imagine for a moment if you were fighting a Deathclaw and you emptied the clip of your rifle and you had to quickly pull the thing out, jam a new magazine in, and then keep firing. That would be really cool, and it would be really tense, especially in survival mode. Maybe my expectations were too high, but I feel like Fallout 4 VR could have been so much more. Now, that's not to say that the game is terrible, but I do think because the game is a port, I wonder if it's even possible to implement things like physically removing and inserting magazines into guns, or to use two hands to aim a rifle, for example. I guess what I'll leave with here is that Fallout 4 VR is a fun game that I'll continue to play and enjoy, but I wish we got something that really pushed the technology. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. Let me know what you think about Fallout 4 VR, if you've tried it. If you like it, let me know in the comments. If you disagree with me and you think I'm an evil person, I guess leave that in the comments below. But otherwise, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.